It's time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets Angela, James, Linda, Alex, Ellen, Tony, Shelly, Teresa, Bernice, Felicia, Willie, Renata, and Tasia. It's BlackProGen Live, genealogy, family history research with flavor.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to BlackProGen Live. It is not Tuesday, it is our little asterisk night, Wednesday, but we're going to show out for our ladies tonight and celebrate our Women's History Month. My name is True Lewis, and I'm going to be your co host for the evening. And now I'm going to turn it over to my girl and your host, Nika Smith.
It's ladies'
It's
night,
night.
and the feeling's right. All right. Anybody know the original name for Kool and the Gang? If you know what their original name was, feel free to put it in the chat room. Perhaps we might give you, I don't know, True. What do you think we might be able to give the people?
We got some custom made stuff in our little kitty.
Yes, if somebody can guess the original name of Kool and the Gang before they became Kool and the Gang, we'll see what we can muster up for you this evening. Thanks so much, True, for opening us up. It is yes, Dale Colston came in the chat room with the correct name. So, we got to figure out what we're going to do for Dale. The Jazzy X is the original name of Kool and the Gang. If you didn't know that, there's always a Wikipedia or a Google away. All right, you all. Let's get into the content for the evening. Finding and tracing our female ancestors can be a monumental task. In this episode, we'll discuss ways a researcher can unearth and track the women in our families and preserve their stories despite what may seem like a lack of records. Thanks for joining us for This is for the Ladies, researching our matriarchs. Have a question or comment? Join the conversation now. Participate in the live chat taking place on YouTube. If you're watching on a computer, it's at the top right-hand corner of the screen or at the bottom of the YouTube app if you're on your mobile device. Also, feel free to weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us during the show and after with @BlackProGen or using the hashtag BlackProGen. Also, don't forget to set your reminders and subscribe to the YouTube channel so then that way you don't miss a single time that we go live for the show or perhaps when we upload videos, anything else you can think of. All you need to do is head to the YouTube channel and click set reminder under the episodes that you're interested in, especially those that are in the upcoming live streams area. Or you can subscribe and make sure that you hit that little bell so then that way, whichever way of communication you've let YouTube know about that you want to be notified using, it will be notified when videos are posted and we go live. Also, you can get your BPG merch today. We've got a million things out there. True is sporting one of them tonight. Sublimated shirts, which I love, which is nothing more than a big word of all over printing, not silk screening, right? We actually saw quite a few people at Roots Tech with BlackProGen Live shirts, sweatshirts on. In fact, Felicia, one of our panelists, was at the African American Genealogy and Family History Seminar in Sacramento this past Saturday and wore her BlackProGen Live sweatshirt and said people were stopping her everywhere to ask her where she got it, especially when they read the marriage license on the back. So be sure to get your BPG merch today. For those researching people of color, were your ancestors enslaved or were they free? Do you have a story in the family of a mixed heritage with Native Americans? Could you possibly have ancestors who were in the Civil War or did some become contrabands? Are you considering writing your family's history? If any of these pertain to you and the genealogy work that you conduct, then Maggie, the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute, may unlock more doors. This institute is unique as it offers 7 tracks over 3 days. That's a total of 84 classes, all pertaining to African American genealogy. Maggie unfolds at the world renowned Genealogy Center at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana, taking place this July 9th through the 11th, 2019. The classes are small, intense, and focused. The tracks offer sessions on in depth slavery era research, unique record sets, beginning and advanced DNA classes, methods of researching pre and post slavery era documents from military to migration, and more. And for the first time, Maggie is offering a writing lab, an entire day for you to focus on your genealogical and historical writing with Anita Henderson, who's an amazing instructor, and an intense dive into the records of the 5 civilized tribes of Oklahoma. Whoop, whoop. I'll be teaching in that track as well. Please be sure to join us at Maggie, the Teaching Institute. Make the best investment in your family's future and past. Choose Maggie. And in fact, someone actually left a comment on the BlackProGen Live Facebook page saying they wish they would have spent their money on Maggie instead of Roots Tech. Interesting comment. All right, let's come off mute. Hello, everybody. It's ladies' night. We're going to shout out Ida B. Wells, Maya Angelou, Fannie Lou Hamer. We also have got Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. All of our ladies are in the house tonight. All of our ancestors are here. Want to welcome Shelly Murphy from Virginia in her pink.
Yay.
Hello, aka
Jay.
Family Tree Girl here.
Hey, all right. We want to welcome James Morgan III, looking all nice and dapper and bluey.
For the record, I'm not a woman, nor do I plan on becoming one.
The resident Y chromosome.
The resident Y chromosome is in the house. Renata joining us from Virginia as well. How are you?
I am here. I am well. It's good to be here. I believe for the first time on the panel in 2019. So I'm glad to be here tonight.
All right, all right. True, holding it down in her sublimated shirt, her sublimated BPG shirt.
Sublimated.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's okay. What my shirt is, here's a quick lesson in t-shirts. My shirt is silk screened. Right? Where it's on top. Sublimated means that it absorbs the ink. So it prints all over. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So she's got her shirt on. How you doing, True?
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm fine. I'm just so glad to be here.
Can she stand up so we can see the rest of the shirt?
She wants you to model your t-shirt, your sublimated
let me make
shirt.
sure
I'm sorry.
my cookies ain't out.
I think it's awesome.
Out.
Yay. Genealogy with seasoning. Awesome.
Yay. The print on the back. All right, you all. I've been getting text messages, comments from all over the place about tonight's episode and how timely it is that we are going to talk about the ladies, the females, the women in our family. So many of you all are having research roadblocks with women. What was May's name? I can't find her maiden name anywhere. I've looked here, I've looked there. Maybe you have an ancestor like my Easter, who was Easter Parker, Easter Williams, Easter Sewell. Every time I look for her, it had a different last name, right? Or maybe you just can't find her at all, right? Maybe you have that roadblock of maybe there were free people of color and the husband was always documented and the wife was not. Right? There are so many roadblocks and things that we encounter when it comes to researching women. And of course, as True said, it is Women's History Month. So of course, we're going to talk about this during the month of March. So the first question that I have for the panel this evening is, what are the common misconceptions about researching our female ancestors? What are some of the things that people automatically off the bat think, when we're talking about the women in our family?
Can't find them. That's the first thing. They're going to say they can't find them. Plus, they don't know their maiden name. So I think that's a myth because we're finding them daily.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I just have to say, like, we always think that, well, what are they going to be at? Where is their records going to be at? What are they going to be in? You're always wondering that, or how could they be in something, in a record? What record would they be standing in? So, I think in the beginning I knew I would touch on that, especially when I would research my enslaved women. I'd be like, well, where am I going to find them?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about women, the further back you go, is that they didn't have jobs and they all just were at home and taking care of the children, and that was it. And I think you'll find, and I know I found in my own family that that's not always the case. I had several women going back over 100 years that actually had jobs and careers. I actually had one great-great-grandmother who was a minister herself, and had her own church and everything, and her husband was not involved with the church. That's something she did on her own. So
yeah, and
I was going to say,
go ahead, Renata.
I was going to say also, well, I want to piggyback on something James said about maybe not knowing that a lot of women started churches. They started churches in the bush harbors. And, I found that out about my grandmother, that she and a group of ladies actually started their church in Lewisburg, which is still there. But what I was going to say is a lot of times there's a misconception that women didn't own property, so they're not being looked for in property records. Yeah, and there were laws earlier on where they couldn't own property, but once those laws were surpassed, we find many women owning property.
Yeah, that was the point that I was getting ready to make, is the fact that there's that common misconception that women didn't own property. And the thing that's so funny to me is I think there's one school of thought that's like, well, they didn't own property, but it's like, but if she was married and she had a husband and he died before she did, where does it go? Right? So there's that.
Yeah,
right. And then there's the second school of thought of, well, women were underneath men, and so there was no way that anybody was going to sell her property, which is not true. Right? It's almost kind of like that. There's that scripture that is often used in Christian churches where it talks about the women knowing their place and staying to the back and being quiet, and how that gets turned into women shouldn't preach. Right?
It's still there.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's a lot of baggage that people have when it comes to how women interact with society, how women interact with the law, how women are documented in history, right? And just as we have formulated ways to get to our people of color ancestors very quickly, you can do the same thing with women, right? We know the workarounds with Black folks, right?
Right.
You just have to retool your brain to think about them in terms of women. So the second question I have is, and this is just what leads to these perceptions, right? Like, do you think it's a matter of people being religious and having that the man is the head and the woman is the neck, or what do you guys think? Why do you guys think? I mean, seriously, why are these perceptions out there? Why do people think that women just literally? It's almost like she went out in that field, picked that cotton, and just laid down, let the man have sex with her, didn't say nothing, didn't do nothing, didn't breathe, and every day that's just what happened.
I think that is something that is a romanticized version of history when it comes to women across all races. But I also try to remember class and the economic status. I mean, back in the days, a lot of families didn't have a lot, especially when we talk about, the Great Depression or what have you. And so you did have women that had to get out there and work and do things to make ends meet, especially if you didn't have a male figure in the household, or maybe he's not getting paid, so women had to step up and assist, and sometimes, and in many cases, had to be the leaders. I think about what's her name? The one from World War II, Rosie the Riveter. You know what I mean? You have that kind of effect, but that's not just a World War II thing. That goes back, even further than that. Women are going to help provide for their families just like anyone else. It's just that they had to think of creative ways, to do it. Many times, this last thing I'll say, many times pre-Civil War, you actually will find women who were selling fruit and different things, knitting, in order to raise money to actually free themselves and their families, which again creates records. In Washington, D.C., and this area is replete with those type of records, if only people would sit down and look at them.
Well, you
Mhm.
know, it's interesting because when you said war, women were
Mhm.
running this country. They were handling like World War One, World War Two, Civil War, pretty much the same thing. They either went with the husband or they
Right.
stayed home in the community, and you really saw the bonding of the communities. My second great grandmother, 1840, I want to say 43, 42, was given a life estate and 11 acres for her and her children. She marries, so now the land goes into the husband's name. And then there was a court situation. But again, she owned land, well, prior to getting married, 11 acres. But it was for her and her children. The reason I'm stressing that, because it was the one illegitimate child in the children of the marriage. The husband was cut out of that.
Right.
And that was Pennsylvania. So I found that interesting comparing and looking at Virginia, it would have just been the husband's land, period. Where in Pennsylvania, that woman was able to own that land. And again, she had to sell the land. So it's interesting because there are myths out there, just like you said, they didn't own land, but yes, they did. And we're seeing those records too.
And you have to really know what those laws are for the place
Yes,
that you're researching.
absolutely.
And I know for me, because I had to study these laws not too long ago to update my research on my Calvin, my great grandfather, he had several different owners, and it was because of the laws that the wives of his owners who died were not able to keep him in every case because of the laws of coverture. And so you have to kind of know when the laws were changed. And,
Yes.
because, we said earlier that if a husband dies, the wife gets the property, but that wasn't always the case, especially in where slaves were concerned. So you have to know what the laws were. So in his case, twice, the property had to be divided, and the wife got part of it, but there were other people that got part of it too. It wasn't automatically just to the wife.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Anytime we're talking about anything on this show, right? We always talk about location
Yes.
and the law,
Oh, Judy.
right? Because
Yes.
don't
I was thinking you remember that in track 1.
Yeah.
Public records in the law, slavery in the law, and she walks you through a
It's a good guideline to always remember that. Like
yeah,
Yeah,
you were
yeah.
saying, remember the
Yeah,
laws
exactly
of the
what you're
day.
saying.
exactly.
Yeah.
And also kind of to bring it to current too, know what the current laws are in your state when it comes
Yes.
to you as a woman, right? And where your property goes, where any of that stuff, what happens to it? Are you in a community property state, or are you not? And
Right.
and depending on, and something, this is a good practice, this is sort of off topic, but it totally relates, right? You need to have bookmarked the statutes for your state for various years. A lot of those are available on Google Books. Why do you need that? Because as you're researching and you're trying to think in your mind, well, you know what? I've hit this roadblock with this particular ancestor. I can't think of where to go from here. You need to know how different scenarios were documented before the law. And then that would then dictate how things are done locally and at the state level. So this is homework for everybody. Go on Google Books, look up your state of interest, look up the statutes,
Yes.
find out if your particular ancestral areas were community property states or not, what the laws were regarding, regarding women owning property, several things, because I don't know anyone else in the group, but I have ancestors who were enslaved, and the slaveholder became the wife, right? They didn't come from her family. They came from her husband's situation. And then she outlived him, maybe got married 2 or 3 more times, right?
Yeah.
So know the laws of the states. James?
One thing, and this is so simple, but we skipped over it. be cognizant of the fact that your female ancestors, particularly ones that are living or maybe have passed within living memory, are oftentimes a real go-to gold mine for genealogy research. You guys might remember sometime last year I told a story about my aunt Rosa here in DC, and I was looking for an obituary for my great grandfather, which was her father. I went to her house one day and asked her. I said, "Hey, Auntie, do you have an obituary of your father that I might be able to scan or whatever?" And she said, "Yeah. Now what you need to do is go upstairs, go in my bedroom. Now when you go in the bedroom, make sure you open the door, and now be careful because there's gonna be a blue suitcase gonna fall down and hit you on the head. When it hits you on the head, bring it down to me." And lo and behold, I went upstairs. I opened that little closet door. The blue suitcase fell down, hit me in the head. I put some ice on it, took it back downstairs, and opened it up. And the suitcase was full of obituaries
Oh
that she had
my.
collected over the years. And I don't know about anybody else's family, but in my family, I can say honestly that women collect more obituaries, pictures, and things like that than my father and grandfather and whatnot for whatever reason. So be cognizant of the fact that a lot of times our female ancestors are themselves a go-to research center. Their houses are, but a lot of times we just skip over them and want to jump online instead of calling grandma or auntie such and
Come
such. And I
on
can tell you
now.
now, a lot of my genealogy research, I got a ton of information from. I got more information from my aunties and whatnot than I did from my uncles. I'll just tell you that right now.
Well, and
To be
you
honest
bring
with
up a very important point because the
Yeah.
the target demographic for genealogy is women,
Right.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Across the board, women
Mhm.
age 50 or so, right?
Mhm.
And so the other thing, and this is something I thought of as well, is yes, obituaries, no funeral notices and stuff in newspapers that to me is like a paramount part of doing genealogy research. But the ones for women are to me more valuable because you are getting those additional surnames for them.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So to me, I would say if you've hit a roadblock, especially if you have an ancestor who died, post emancipation, right? Look for obituaries and not just
Mhm.
for the particular woman herself, but her female children, right?
Yes.
Her sisters,
Yes.
or
Right.
your or male ancestor sisters, right?
Mhm.
Don't just look for Addie Thomas. Put in
Right.
her, put in the first name of her brother if you know it, or
Yeah.
you play around with your search terms a little bit, because I'm telling you though, and even marriage announcements in the newspaper,
Right.
right? People don't typically do those a lot, now, but in the South, they're standard. They are still printing those down here.
Absolutely. When I went to the Library of Congress a few weeks ago, and I actually found a newspaper article about my great grandmother, and it said she was sick, and so it said my great grandmother was tending to her, and then my cousin such and such, and all these people had come from around
Wow.
Alabama just to visit
Yeah.
her because she was sick, and then of course they announced she was better and she was going to church on Sunday. Like,
Yeah, I love the
Yeah.
community news section, which are typically
The
to
little
me, I think
social.
Absolutely.
yes, I think it was
Yeah,
written by a lot of
absolutely.
women, right? Like they had the
Mhm.
Chicago Defender had that section where
Yeah.
Rebecca Stevenson, my uncle's auntie, she used to send in the
From
dispatch
so
from
and
Lake.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Renata Yarbrough Simmons Sanders went to the revival last week and
Yeah.
she
Mhm.
fell
Yeah.
out, but they picked her up, and
and, and
Yeah,
don't forget my
social.
she
favorite
got
one.
so overcome. She got so overcome by the spirit of the
Yes.
Lord that she almost fell in the lake during the baptisms.
Yeah.
Like
They
it's
And
always
also
don't
Yeah.
and
tell,
don't
they also
and
tell if your relatives came to visit from out of
yes.
town, or
Yes.
if you
And
went, and so that gives you a lot of clues about where family is. I have one from the Journal and Guide where my grandmother took my mother and her sister to New York, and it tells what hotel they stayed in and everything. So, yeah,
and
But
same
but
thing.
notice what is driving this though. The women are
Women.
reporting,
yes,
Yes.
and the women are being
Yes.
reported on.
about,
Yes.
yes.
Right?
don't forget my favorite one. Don't forget my favorite one. Sister Shelley Murphy is hosting a tea party for all the
Yes.
Oh,
Negro
yeah,
women of the
those
city.
two.
Yes.
Birthday parties, too.
And this is how I found the great grandfather's sister and his obit, because it said and his last name was Curitin, but Mrs. Stella Thomas from so and so, his sister. I just got if I didn't know, well, he's got a sister. And oh, by the way, her surname, married surname is Thomas. So that just gives you more leads. And how
Yeah.
I found a court case, Google. Because
Mhm.
Pennsylvania's got their court cases are scanned in. And again, this is like 1860. And it was a Google Books. They're scanned in. And it was by her name. It was her, the
Mhm.
female's name linked to the property in the court case, not the husband.
Do you think that people tend to overlook or think that that women just aren't accessible or findable in records because of
Yes.
the fact that the whole household wasn't enumerated on the census before 1850? Do you think that is one of the reasons why people tend to just not, whoever's rustling papers, I'm gonna get you?
I think they're
Jane.
printing. And they just
Not
went, I think they're printing.
It's
So
not
to
me.
follow up with what you're saying, and my printer died, so it's in another room.
It's
So
not
it ain't
here. There are
mine. I'll
no
be going
sounds
to the
here.
library.
Somebody
No
is
sounds here.
somebody
You
is
know.
printing. I don't know what it
But
was, but it just sounded like, I was like, what is that?
but
But
to
do you
your
think that's the
point,
reason why people
yes.
think that maybe?
Yeah.
I
I think because they have the myth and that's what they believe or what was presented to them, that it hampers their research because they don't think they can go any further because they think, oh, wait a minute, it's all about the man, it's all about his rights. That's what the law was. You don't know what's out there, regardless of what the law is. You don't know. Didn't George Washington marry I can't think of
Martha
her last
Custis.
name? She had land, slaves, and everything. Now that came into his house,
Yes.
but those were still hers.
Yes.
So you never
absolutely.
know what until you look. You're not gonna know.
Well, and we always preach the gospel of the census ain't everything. We need to
Right.
put that on a t-shirt. Write that down, true girl. That's
The
what we're gonna put.
census, the census has
ain't
no sense.
everything. And it has to say
census-
thing, not thing. Thing.
It has no sense. I always say it's
Right.
the most inaccurate document that's out there
It don't have no
because
sense.
you have to analyze that and break that thing down because you don't even know who you're dealing with or who gave the information on most of them.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
One thing that I think also happens oftentimes with women, even to this day, is that women do things and they're not valued as much as when a man does things. To go back to somebody said earlier about women founding churches, people will say, "Oh, well, Reverend such and such was the first pastor," but it was this group of women that got together, that got the community together to get a little schoolhouse, to get Reverend such and such there in the first place. And a lot of times people don't think about that. Not to spoil anything, but I have been working with Ellen on something for a future episode, and we found something like that where there was a woman who had done some things to establish a church, but in a lot of records, you see this man who's the minister, but in reality, she was the one who had established this church.
Absolutely.
So if you want to learn about that, you have to stay tuned for a future episode of BlackProGen. But I think sometimes and even in families, I think sometimes we have a tendency, unfortunately, to minimize the things that our female ancestors have done, because of the society we live in. But those things are important, just as, if not more important, than what we as men do. I hope she didn't hear that.
She heard it.
Probably did.
What happened
Nika,
now?
you're muted.
Oh.
Nika.
He was
She's
saying that
muted.
he heard Christy didn't hear him.
Oh.
He hoped
She
didn't
heard
hear him.
it. If not, I'm
She
gonna
heard.
tell her.
Oh my Lord! Well,
Okay.
there's an interesting conversation going on in the chat room, and I think it's worthwhile because people are kind of opining about, like, why is it that women are the ones that want to preserve and are interested in the history? And I think it's because we birth life, right? Like that's a part of who we
That's a
are,
good
like,
way of
naturally,
saying it.
right? And so of course we're going to want to, just as my son is growing up, I still want to hold him close.
Yes.
Right? I still want him here, but I know that he's got to spread his wings out in the world. He's got to do things, right? He's got to explore. But
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? But you still, it's almost like you have an invisible umbilical cord that's still connecting you. You know what I mean? And so I think by nature, women are just a lot more tangible in that way, in terms of wanting to have that connection like that. And you know, of course, that's all subjective, because you could have a horrible family experience and not want to have any tangible connections to people. But then why would you be watching our show? But still, right? It's still, I still think that's the reason why, is because of nurturing, you know, women, motherhood, all of those things speak to family connections and birthing legacy and preserving legacy. And that's a reason why I think women are more apt to that. But then, you know, you also, I think the way that men manifest it is by naming their sons, you know, with postnomials, like the third or the fourth, right? That is their way of sort of actualizing legacy, and it's done in a different way. So how does ongoing patriarchy continue to protect the system of sort of erasing women from the historical narrative, right? James sort of brought that up in reference to, you know, kind of giving like a, you know, like a little nugget, a little crumb, you know, for a future episode, right? And when I'm talking about patriarchy, I'm talking about, by definition, a system of society or government in which the father or the eldest male is the head of household and descent is traced through the male line, right? Typically, genealogists will focus on men all the time because they're easy, right? And it also is a system of society or community organized and patriarchal just by males, right? How do you all feel that just the ongoing way of us doing things that's, you know, male dominated, how are women now still being erased from the historical narrative, right? Because we're talking about way back, okay, no census, but how is that happening now?
Well, but
I
you
kind of
first,
might not. I might not be. It might not be quite now, but I know leading up to now, you would have say a woman did something. Well, you know, she would have been referred to as Mrs. Arthur Yarborough, or, you know, Mrs. James Sanders. I would have been Mrs. James Sanders instead of by my own name. And then even a little further back than that was the relic of, you know, you see that a lot. So when a woman is has an obituary, it would be the relic of. And so I know that's not quite a modern day
Like
answer.
she's like that old piece of lace over there on
Yeah,
the
exactly. You know, so as we're researching our females, we're seeing, you know, when we are finding them, we're often seeing them in those lights. So
it's
that
like, girl,
still affects us.
it's like, oh, forget the fact that her husband died. She said she's the relic of, like, you know what I
Relic
mean?
of,
the
It's like,
relic,
Yep,
it's
a
like,
piece
yep,
of furniture,
yeah,
a
that's what I'm saying. Like,
shawl.
she's a piece of lace on the shiffer robe,
yep.
right? Like, you know what I mean? Don't worry her little pretty head about anything. But that's the thing. Women have been resilient, right? Like,
Yeah.
even now, though, right? I think one of the ways that we're sort of changing the narrative. I remember when I got married, and California changed the marriage licenses so that you put the name that you were going to go by after you got married on the marriage license.
Right.
So you had your maiden name, and then it was the name I'm going to go by from, you know, from this point forward is at the bottom. You know what I mean? So that to me is a marked change.
And you have a choice.
Yes, and the fact that you have a choice, can you go hyphenated or not, right? That wasn't, you know, that wasn't a relic of, you know, that wasn't the lace on the shifro. I'm gonna be using that for the next week.
Well, I'll tell you how I think it affected me, like as in today, and then as opposed to what my mom would have experienced. Like, she was always a fighter for us, doing things that the men would do. So, you know, my grandfather's right here, World War II, daddy's Vietnam, and then comes me. So there was resistance from my father, but not from my World War II vet. The people in my family was like, you're not supposed to go in the army. Girls don't do that.
Yeah.
You know, so that was like kind of like an example to me. And then now my son and Eddie had Everly. So now I'm excited. I'm like, ooh, I wonder if she'll continue that tradition, you know, of all these 4 generations. She will be the 5th if she just even did 3 years, you know.
Right.
And I know I had a lot of kickback with that when I went in. And then when I was, you know, a single parent all that time in the military, and then I got married, and it was like, do I want to put my last name that I carry now?
Right.
And I still push back on that a lot, but I use it when it's appropriate for me and how I feel about it. But I'm my own person. you know.
Yeah.
But I know my mom and them, they were like not having it. That's why she pushed me and Betty to do a lot of things, because the men in the family would just, you know, like you said, we were talking earlier, they would have to be in the back. You know, they'd have
Right.
to be back there cooking and cleaning and keeping the kids still. Whereas us,
Child, girl, not,
Well, but
not.
you
Hey,
know, it's
one thing.
interesting
Hold on,
because my daughter.
Jelly, your connection is you sounding like you are in a iRobot
Twilight Zone.
in the Twilight
Oh
Zone.
my. Okay.
Connect and unconnect. Let's see,
Hey,
James or Renata, and then James.
one thing that I
Um,
want to make sure I mention
James, you
is
did
that
not follow directions.
You
I'm
sure
sorry.
didn't, because I said Renata, then James.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My apologies.
I was just gonna say I don't know why I can't think who it is. As soon as one of you tell me, I'm gonna be like, that's who it was. Something was just in the news recently. A couple gave a large donation, and it was billed
Oh, it
out
was
and
Bill Gates.
as
No. It
no,
was
it wasn't Bill Gates
Stephen King. Was it Stephen King and his
and
wife?
his
Right.
wife.
Donation.
And she stepped up and was like, I have a name, so the donation was going down
Yeah,
just
because
in
it was
Stephen
going to
King's.
the New England Genealogical and Historical
That's
Society.
exactly what it was. Thank you for reminding an old lady. That's exactly what it was. And so, and so she stepped up, and she stepped up with some humor, which was cool, but she made her point, because this donation was from both of them. It was not
Mhm.
from Stephen King and his wife. So that's a
Yeah.
very modern day example of
We are rejecting the relic of James.
it.
Yes, we're not barefoot and pregnant.
No,
And all that other
I'm like
stuff.
the Atlas women. Nah, it wasn't going down like that. Yeah, we gonna be
Mm.
cooking, but we gonna be fussing the
The
whole
whole
way
time
there.
about it. Yeah.
Yes, James.
One thing I'd like to add on to this discussion about patriarchy and how it affects historical research is I think that there's less of a stigma of about giving birth to children outside of wedlock, um, which in a lot of ways I think should be considered liberating, I suppose, for women as well as for men to a lesser degree. Years ago, I mean, and this happened in my own family, where you had people who were getting pregnant, weren't married, and all of a sudden it's a scandal throughout the city, and even in that scene, for those who saw If Beale Street Could Talk, that scene where the women where the son's mother was like, she wasn't accepting no bastard and all this type of stuff. That actually happened in my family. Very, I'll be honest with you, it happened when my mother was conceived, and so those things happen more often than not, which, in my family, that's what ended up causing my grandmother to leave Alabama to go to New Jersey. She gave birth in Brooklyn, but that's how my mother's side got to New Jersey, because of stuff like that. So when you see a woman one place and then she's disappeared or she moved across country, sometimes it's because of those type of things.
Come
Yeah.
on
And we're
now,
sitting here wondering why.
James. Come on now, bring it home. Bring it home now. If you ain't seen Beale Street, I'm gonna need you to go there. You can't rent it right now because I just checked for
Yes, you
somebody
can on
named True
Blackbuster.
yesterday.
We just got into an argument about that yesterday.
You can watch it on. You can watch it on Blackbuster
On
or Negro
Blackbuster.
Flicks.
Blackbuster.
Yeah, that's when
I
you go to the
need to keep
barbershop
it
and the guy comes
legal.
in with the DVDs.
That's all I'm
never
saying.
mind.
You over here, okay? You over here. You about to try and get us shut
Never mind.
He
down
all
over
on
here on
Twister and
YouTube.
LiveWire, and
No. But what you're bringing up is a very important point, though, too.
Yeah.
That this is. I'm glad we're having this conversation, because one of the byproducts of that child out of wedlock scenario, right, becoming more common, is the fact that those children will have the last name potentially of the mother's family and not the father's family. And
Yeah.
so that's something to keep in mind. That's not just a 21st century scenario, right?
Right.
Something else to consider as well, especially when you're researching enslaved people, is we can't make an assumption. Number one, we talk about this all the time, that the last name that a person has, during emancipation, is the last slaveholder, like the last person that was their slaveholder before they were emancipated. That is the same surname they have. right, as an emancipated person. We talk about that all the time. No, it may have been 2 or 3 owners previous. That name may have come from their mother's family, not even their father's family, right? I have
Absolutely.
scenarios in my own family where the last name should have been this. Half the family took this name and half the family took that name. And not from a patriarchal sense, right? Remember, children took on the disposition of their mother, so it is more likely in some ways that an formerly enslaved person is going to have a matriarchal slaveholder surname, right? Than it would be to have a patriarchal slaveholder's surname.
Absolutely. I've seen one family. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I've seen one family where same mother, same father, but the girls took the mother's name and the boys took the father's name. Like, really? Those things do happen.
Yeah. So let's get to tips and tricks. What are your go-to ways of finding the women in our families? I talked about obituaries. For me, that's almost always a jackpot moment. Another tactic you can use, Social Security applications index on Ancestry. I think that's probably another one of my go-to areas. Why? Because some of the listings will list the names of both parents, including a woman with a maiden name. What are some of the tips, tricks, databases, and things that you use to unearth and preserve the stories of your female ancestors?
Well,
I like hunting for unique names.
Unique names.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
love
like
hunting
you Layla, or something like that.
Onto euthanasia, all of that.
Not euthanasia, Lord, today.
Okay. I'll say 3 things about like little secrets that I have, and then you can clean it up, Nika. One is the pensions, because we just saw our friend Kristen Cleach. She did a whole thing on her female widow on the pension file. So, I'm really starting to get into all of that, how you can find women through that. And then I think for me personally, tragedy. For some reason, when it comes to those wills and deaths and things like that in Pennsylvania, for me, because I traced 5 women to get to my patriot. I could have went the other way, but I didn't. But she had wills in the early 1800s, the late 1700s. A lot of my women. I have so much documentation on these women in my family that you can find them in records. It's there. You just have to dig. But when I want to go back to about the tragedy is when I was saying about like the wills and the deaths, or like when something bad was going on, like a historical event. Look for your women there. Like, make a timeline of what was going on and find out what the women were doing, even if it's locally in a town. So I think that's what I wanted to add.
So, we also have to think about, right, vital records. Okay, that's one way to unearth the names of women, right? Birth, marriage, death. Right, those are the easy catch-alls for unearthing the names of women. James talked about searching for unique names. I think, especially if you have someone that has multiple siblings, try to find the siblings and where they are. And try to recreate that community, as well as another tip. This just works outside of just women. Look at who's on the census or on other records around your ancestors and try to locate them forward and backwards to see if you can locate folks. Because a woman can get married however many times she wants to. My grandma Alice, I'll never forget. I thought Grandma Alice just married King, and that was it. I had this whole fairy tale version of my mind of what Grandma Alice did, and then I started finding all these Alice Atlas marriage records, and I printed them out and I showed my girl. I said, "Grandma, who are all these Alice Atlases? Like, this isn't your first cousin because they're too old." She said, "Oh, that's my grandma."
Yeah.
I said, "How many times did she get married?" "Oh, she got married like 5 times." Every record, and then the name she went by, I'd never found a marriage record for her and that man. I don't even know who the Franklin man is. I just know she died of Franklin, but was born allegedly a Smith. But she went by Alice, she went by Jax, she went by 6 or 7 other names in between there. But the marriage licenses were the sources. Any other things we talked about: pensions, death related, tragedy related, newspapers. We talked about that in terms of looking for those, Renata fell out at the Renata fell out at the baptism this week.
Yeah.
Or what else? Come on,
And
y'all.
just
I would
don't
say-
forget don't forget the probate and records of administration and probate, because even if the wife didn't get the stuff, the wife is going to be mentioned. So we need to check there too.
And I know back in the
Oh,
old
oh,
days when we first started, they used to always say, mind the men. So you can never go wrong with minding the men. Focus on those men and you'll find those women too. That trick's still not going to get old.
James?
That's true. Also, intra-family adoptions also are a big thing that people oftentimes forget. I think about my own great grandmother, who she was born Addie Daniels, and her mother died unfortunately from childbirth. So my great grandmother was adopted by her mother's twin sister, Annie Vickers. So in some of her records, she's either Addie Daniels or Addie Vickers, and depending on the census year, she's either listed as a niece or daughter. And then she got married. So she had 3 different surnames throughout her life. But if you don't know her narrative, then you would be really confused if you don't know all that background information. So yeah.
I think that's a great point. Someone else in the chat room, Tom Reed, definitely great suggestion. Draft cards, I think, are a huge underutilized resource when it comes to this. Why are you thinking draft cards? Of course, right? Women were not getting drafted, but they would be listed as the nearest relative to the draftee, right? Exactly, that next of kin, right? So something that Angela's talked about, she did this on a recent webinar where she was talking about the Great Migration. Try searching draft cards for birth locations that are of interest to your family research. Just put in St. Landry Parish, or Ventress, Louisiana, as a birthplace for the people who were being listed for the draft, and just scroll the names, look, and if you're on Ancestry, hover over that view record link. If you hover over the link and don't click it, but hover over it, it will give you a short preview of what the document is, so that you don't invest all your time, right, going back and forth, right? You may see names or things that you may not be, you're not sure about. And that works for World War I and World War II. Any other tips, tricks? What are other ways that you try to preserve the ancestral story? Renata, I see your finger.
Well, I wanted to respond to Chris Smothers in the chat room. He asked what you do when the 1900 census references a marriage, but there's no paperwork down at the clerk's office or whatever. And I just had a client where I had a situation like this, and I'll say to Chris what I said to her, kind of having to hypothesize in the end. A lot of times people said they were married when they weren't. And now the record could be lost, but when you kind of see it happening with the same person over and over again, and also if you know this is something that happens on that line of the family, because family patterns are strong. So I had to kind of hypothesize with this client. It was a similar situation. It was a 1910 census where she actually said she was widowed, but there was no evidence that she had ever been married anywhere to anybody, and nobody could find a maiden name for her. So I believe that she just took that name because we found the father. So she took the name of the person who was the father of her children and said she was married to him or widowed because he was deceased, but she never was. So just consider that. Consider that. You can tell the census taker whatever you want to tell the census taker.
Well, and then also, if you may not have been reporting the information, your neighbor or someone that lived around you could have, you know what I mean? So, and I think that's a great thing, especially, we always talk about this. Don't be so tied to vital records, right? Don't be so tied to, oh, well, they had to have a marriage license. No, they didn't, right? They were living as man and wife together, potentially on that plantation. They didn't have a piece of paper. You know what I mean? Either he was with you or he wasn't. So, so we can't always be wedded to that. At the same time, that doesn't mean that we don't exhaust the option of searching it out. So you did do the due diligence. You did look at the local level. The other thing is, did you look in the right location?
Right, exactly.
Because if parish or county boundary lines change, have you done your timeline for your family where you know exactly where they were during a certain time period? Because if you lived in a high traffic area like where my family was from, Northeast Oklahoma, people went to Missouri and they went to Kansas all the time. So I can't say, Oh, the marriage happened to it had to happen in Oklahoma. Well, Oklahoma didn't become a state until what, 1907, 1905? If I'm looking for a marriage that took place in 1902, is it in Oklahoma or is it in the Indian Territory? Or should I be looking in Missouri, or should I be looking in Kansas? Right? So know your locations, and don't also at the same time, don't be wedded to vital records. Anything else you guys can think of for things, tips, tricks, locations? I have seen that too, where a woman just, now she's Renata Morgan. Well, how did she become Renata
Oh my.
Morgan? Right? You know what I mean? And it says she's widowed.
Robbing the cradle.
Hey Renata, how you doing?
Hey. Hey.
But you know what I mean? It's like she just assumed this. People could assume names, y'all. That's why my grandfather reinvented himself. He was Oswald. That was his name on the census, everywhere. And then when it came time for him to get that Social Security application and he had to get a delayed birth certificate, he became Jack Oscar Sewell. So people, it's odd to us now that folks just assume names and change names. That's not new. People have been doing that since the beginning of time. That's nothing new. Anything else you guys can think of before we move on to Ask Mariah?
Also, I would say to think about the importance of food. I think sometimes we overlook the importance of how food actually informs family history, and we just say, oh well, women, all they did was cook and clean. No, that's important. As Michael Tweedy shows us with his book, The Cooking Gene, food can be a marker for culture, for geography. Trust me, being from New Jersey with family from Alabama, but I live with a woman who's got Louisiana background. We have discussions all the time about the differences in food culture and whatnot. And I'm sure that if I were to have a child, they would, because my mother's from a different place than Christy is. So that's something also to consider as well. And don't overlook that or oversimplify the importance of food also, because cookbooks do exist.
Look, if somebody wrote it down.
Right. But you'll find that and whatnot. Everybody put in their favorite recipe, and I have seen that before, where 100 years ago they all put together, had a contest or something of that nature. So think about that as well on your research.
Yeah, I was about to say too, document, preserve those recipes, right? That's an act of restoring or preserving the memory of your female ancestors, right? I don't think a lot of people do. I don't think a lot of people do put emphasis on recipes. I remember when my grandmother passed away, we were going through her things, and where I wanted the newspaper articles and the obituaries and a few London fog coats, because that was my grandmother's joint, right? My sister wanted the recipes. And so there was this leather bag my grandmother used to bring with her every time she came to visit us. It was an American Tourister, like a medium-sized little bag, and that's where all the recipes. My sister wanted that bag, and she put all the recipes in there. And there were some in there from that she clipped out from Essence magazine. They talked about a chitlin stick, and I had never heard of a chitlin stick. And and it was just things that she had clipped from newspapers, stuff she had written down. It was in her handwriting. You know what I mean? So I think that definitely is a way to preserve the female memory. True. What were you going to say?
I'm in all agreement, with what you're saying. I keep the diaries. I'm already starting pudding. She's only 11. I'm starting to keep things meticulously written down and on my blog. So, we're putting those things in place now so that when they reach back, when they take that Sankofa journey, my great grandkids one day, they'll be like, oh, Nanny wrote all this down, from previous generations up until myself. So
yeah, I think there's some great suggestions in the chat room. C. Davis says, explain how women did their work. It was long and hard work. Washing was all day. Ironing was extra. Absolutely. That's why my mother cannot stand ironing to this day. My grandmother made her iron sheets, and she could not understand why you would do that if you were just going to lay down on them and flatten them out. I mean, it's true. It's something to keep in mind. I would say there is no reason to treat a woman as a woman in your search, right? If you're going to exhaust all avenues, if you're going to really do diligence, we always tell you go local. Something, oh, totally forgot about this. Don't think that there aren't divorce records.
That's right.
Right
There
here.
are.
1881, right there. See that? 111 by 18.
That's what I'm saying. Don't think that there aren't divorce records or that women weren't involved in the courts, right?
Yeah,
I've seen
yeah.
where female family members of mine actually took their husbands to court because the land that they had, that the man was using like it was his, it was hers, and he was making decisions and he wasn't including her. So she took him to court to make sure that she could have control over her situation. And the folks stayed married after that.
And speaking of that, the Freedmen's Bureau records are full of complaints from women who have not, either that man has left them, that man's not treating them right, that man has hit them or whatever. They are all over the Freedmen's Bureau records. And I was about to say something else that I was reminded of when I saw the link True posted about haplogroups. We can learn about our maternal origins without a doubt by getting an mtDNA test. And if you want to, whoever you are, if you're a female, it's going to be your mother's 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 mother, wherever she came from. But men can take the mtDNA also, and that is an excellent way to dispel all the Indian princess, Cherokee grandmother myths or confirm them. And this is just like an honor to those maternal ancestors to really know where they did or didn't come from. And so that's just something I thought about when I saw your post.
Your ancient history, your mito mom, I call them.
Mito mom.
Mito mom. Well, and to that point, that also speaks back to X chromosomal DNA research as well, right? Where your X chromosome, right? If you're a man, it comes directly from your mother. So if we're talking about your DNA matches, let's use James for an example, since he just happens to be the only Y chromosome on the show tonight, right? If I was a DNA match to James, let's say I matched James 20 centimorgans and I found out that it's all in the X chromosome, that would immediately clue me into his mother's side of the family. Why? Because James gets a Y from his dad, he gets an X from his mother. So that directs your research in a particular way. From there, right, if it's only 20 centimorgans, that means that I've got to go back several generations. From there, I then move to his maternal grandparents. I move to his maternal grandfather and his maternal grandmother. But here's where it gets tricky. With X chromosome DNA matches, or with X chromosomes involved, there are no male to male hand-me-downs, right? So that means that while I'm looking at his maternal grandfather, I look at that maternal grandfather's mother only, not his father, because there's a male to male hand-me-down, there's a Y chromosome. On the mother's side, on the grandmother's side, I'm looking at maternal grandma, I'm looking at her father and her mother. And you use the same formula, and that can help you target down your research even more. And then here's the best part too. If there are half relationships involved with a woman involved, talk about good eating right now when it comes to DNA.
Absolutely. I want to give a shout out to my maternal grandmother ancestor, my mito mom, Ann Barwick, since you mentioned it. That's the furthest back I can go on my mother's, on my X chromosome. She was born in 1837 in Georgia. So since you mentioned it.
All right. My mito mom is Margaret Russell. She was born in 1804 in Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Drew, who's your mito mommy?
My mito mommy is Dorothea Zimmerman. She's had her daughter Anna Maria Lambert, who is my 5th great grandmother, is the wife to my patriot. So that's my BlackProGen meetup thing, is my Dorothea Zimmerman. So if my patriot was born in 1764, I can't remember how old she is, but she's like my 6th grandmother.
All right.
That's my oldest one.
Who's your oldest one, Renata?
So my oldest one, do you mean on my mother's
Direct
line
Your
or
mother's
direct
mother.
maternal? So that's
Yeah.
going to be Lavinia Brown. And I don't remember her birth year, but it's like 1840 or 30 something out of Warren County, North Carolina.
I stand corrected. Ann Barrow was born in South Carolina in 1837. I said Georgia.
And you know what? All mines are in Pennsylvania all through that 6 generations, straight PA, even down to me, 1 through 7 of us.
All right. All right.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, we've had a spirited conversation. Chat room has been flying. You guys let us know, who are your mito moms for you, your direct female ancestors who are feeding into your DNA, or, perhaps provide you inspiration, or maybe you are trying to find these women, unearth their names, right? Unearth their identities and figure out who they are, what their lives were like. Hopefully we've provided you with a lot of resources tonight to pull on, look forward. Don't forget, you can always rewind and fast forward the show as it's happening live and then catch back up later, or catch the replay. There may have been something that somebody mentioned kind of in passing that may have, piqued your interest. This is why this is a great medium, is because you can go back and watch it at your leisure, right? Also, we've placed some links in the chat for different episodes, different things we brought up, like death records, and we had a great episode on the slave narratives, where we actually talked from a lot of women's perspectives on the slave narratives, right? It's another really utilized resource, right? That's something that's there. Freedmen's Bureau records. There is no shortcut for that. There isn't one. There is not one. There is no shortcut. Just want to make sure you understand. You've got to go page by page, read those guides. You may want some of those salacious details, like Renata was talking about. The women said the man didn't hit her and all kinds of stuff. Maybe you might find where Renata passed out at the baptism in the Freedmen's Bureau records. I don't know. Someone let us know if you.
If Renata goes to church this weekend,
No, I want to
passes
find
out,
where Renata married James.
If somebody comes across a Renata marrying a James in the Freedmen's Bureau records, I will holler. Okay,
There will be no Renata.
and we will even take variations like Renata, Renasa, right, and a Jimmy. We'll take a Jerry. We'll take all of those. Oh my goodness! All right, everybody. It is time for your favorite part of BlackProGen Live, which is Ask Mariah. This is the part of the show where you, the viewer, submit your questions, queries, conundrums, and more to the panel, and we wait in live with research help specifically geared towards you. Panelists never see the queries beforehand, so you get a chance to see us work together live to help our Genia buds get past their brick walls. Tonight's query is from Denise Muhammad. She's joining us again this week because she's super awesome and she loves to join us on video, and we wish more people would join us on video. So thank you so much, Denise, for joining us. We'll see your beautiful, gorgeous face in a second, but we have to get your query out first. So Denise says, and I'm going to read in her voice, and I never can get this right. I would like to know where my great-grandmother, Maribel Doyle Carr, was living in 1900. I have been unsuccessful in locating her prior to the 1910 in any record. So we're looking for a 1900 census or any sort of record prior to 1910 for Maribel. They probably said her name like that. For Maribel Doyle Carr. She was born May 1886, Campbell County, Lynchburg, Virginia. She married Peter Doyle in Buxton, Iowa, January 1st, 1903. So we've got a jump from Virginia to Iowa. 1903. Her mother's name is Nellie Goggins. Father was James John Carr. She had one brother named John Wesley Carr. John and Wesley together as a name is just super ubiquitous in my family. It's like you can never have, there's no other Johns. It's John Wesley everywhere. I don't know about anybody else's family.
I have one too.
I have too many John Wesleys. And then when people, that's the thing, someone say, oh, well, I talked to John Wesley. Well, which one? There's like 6 that are living. According to oral history, her mother Nellie worked for a German doctor in Lynchburg who was also her daddy. Lord. So the German doctor was the actual real daddy. Lord, okay. Nellie died sometime after Mary's birth. After the mother's death, the children were raised by Nellie's family. So this sounds similar to what James was talking about with his great grandmother with the Vickers situation, where a sister took, or a relative took the baby. So we've got Mary. 1886, Campbell County, Lynchburg, Virginia. Married Peter Doyle. 1903, Iowa. Mother's name is Nellie Goggins. Alleged Paul, who is the Paul, but might not be the Paul, but is the Paul. German doctor somewhere in Lynchburg. And then we've got Nellie dying sometimes after Mary's birth, and her after the mother's death. The children were raised by Nellie's family. Last slide, in terms of records, she's got 1910 through 1940 census, also 1925 state census for Iowa, death certificate in Polk County, Des Moines, Iowa, August 12th, 1966, marriage record to Peter Doyle in Buxton, Iowa, January 1903. She has also done DNA testing with Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, African Ancestry, and My Heritage. All right, welcome, Denise.
Hey, everybody.
Yes. So you have, as with last week, you've done your due diligence. We applaud you. We bow to your genealogical excellence. What are some suggestions? She's looking for a 1900 census. She is trying to get her hands on the 1900 census because her ancestor is a black hole born person. Okay. The black hole is the abyss that we all have ancestors that go into. For me, it starts with my great-grandparents, people who were born between the 1880 census and the 1900 census, where you are trying to establish roots for those people. What are some of the tactics that she can use to try to find Maribel?
Well, one of the first things I'm noticing, I'm looking at the 1910 census for them. It appears that Maribel in the 1910 census was 24 years old. So we're talking about a dare I say it, a child at the time of that we're looking for. So do we have her parents in the 1900 census at all?
I have not found any parents in the 1900 census at all, and
Okay.
I kind of think, maybe I'm kind of caught up in my head is still in the family story, and maybe that's why I'm not finding anything. And I don't feel 100% sure that the name was even Goggins for her mother.
Okay.
So because I'm not finding any Goggins or any Carr that's related to her family. Even the DNA matches are not coming up with those surnames. So that kind of, I'm kind of skeptical about that as well.
Understood. Assalamu alaikum, by the way.
Well, like it's allowed.
Yay.
So, okay, if I'm looking at the right census, we've got Peter working in a coal mine.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, that is a minor.
All right. So I'll make sure that everybody can see this because I'm like, I don't want to have the wrong Peter and the wrong Mary, because Peter and Mary. Remember, Peter and Mary were together at the tomb, and remember Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and so that those two names are kind of synonymous. So we've got them in a sea of snow. We don't see any other people of color on this page except for them, of course, because this is Iowa. This is 1910. So we've got Maribel there. We've got the children, right? 1900, we technically should have Hetty, right? Because she's 15 in 1910. And then we really should have all the kids. Potentially, maybe not Maddie because she's 11. But the two children should be there with her and Peter. Now, he says they've been married 8 years at this point. You found a marriage license, which was in 1903. So that technically is correct. Peter has a previous marriage.
Yes. And those children, Hattie, Maddie, and Letha, are his children from the first marriage.
So you vetted that.
Yes.
Yeah, because you look at this additional column here. She's given birth to 5 kids. None are living.
Right. She had 13 children, and the first 7 of them all died, one right after another.
Oh, wow. Ooh, go ahead, James.
No question. I found a record that looks interesting it's in Virginia. Did he ever go by the name Parrish?
He has a brother named Paris. He had a brother named Paris.
Okay.
So
I found them. I found some of them in Staunton, Virginia.
Yes, that's exactly correct. That's where his brother Paris stayed in Staunton, Virginia, and Peter and his sister Elizabeth are the 2 that came to Buxton, Iowa. and lived in the coal mining camps.
Shelly in the chat room says, "Did you check Des Moines, the museum for coal miners?"
I have not. No, I have not checked that. Oh.
Okay. She says Stanton I know that's Staunton, Virginia. I was doing some Stanton, Virginia. The Virginia people are cracking the whip on you for that, James. Okay. Let's see, because you pronounced it wrong.
You pronounced it wrong, so they was getting on you.
I would say, have you looked? Did Peter or her maybe have an estate, or did they ever own any land in Iowa while they were there?
Not that I know of. My grandmother always talked about that her mother received a widow's pension after Peter died. And Peter died in 1934. She always talked about she never worked a day in her life, and she always had his pension. I have not been able to locate the pension as of yet, but it would be in Des Moines, Iowa, the pension.
Yeah, because he's too young to have been in the Civil War, so that's not the option. It probably had to be his some sort of coal mining pension, I would imagine.
Okay.
Unless what James, this is what maybe I don't think Spanish American War. He would have been too old for World War I. So I'm thinking it's something with coal mining.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Maybe vetting, like, see if there are employment records for coal mining companies in that particular area, right? Because I would imagine that pretty much everybody in the neighborhood, for the most part, we've got some general farms, coal mine. There's a guy that's next door to him that is named George Boggs, that is an engineer at the coal mine. There's another miner at the coal mine, right? Labor at the coal mine. So everybody in this area appears, at least in this particular spot, appears to have, worked at this coal mine. What was the name of the company that ran it? And if so, right, you've got death certificates, you've got, maybe you potentially could write to them to see if they can perhaps give you some kind of a lead, right?
Okay.
Have you checked newspapers?
I have checked newspapers, and I found a lot on Mary Bell Doyle. There's quite a few articles about her, and it actually coincides with all the stories my grandmother told me about house fires, and so I found a lot of those articles, but nothing on Peter except for the obituary. Nothing on Mary past, I would say probably 1910 is the first article that starts, 1920.
Okay, so there's a suggestion in the chat room to get the state mining annual reports, and they're saying that it lists the casualties and accidents. So that's the other thing I just thought about too, is insurance.
Right.
Okay.
Maybe she was getting an annuity or something as a result of maybe his death. Right? Like if it was super catastrophic or something like that, I would even potentially start out with looking to see if there were any major disasters with coal mines in this particular town, right? Like not searching for a name, but like just put in, Bluff Creek, Iowa, and see, was there an explosion? Was there this? Was there that? You know what I mean? Just to see. Churches, have you looked to see what the Black churches were in that community?
I have the church. They attended a church in Des Moines for years. I haven't found a church prior to that in Buxton, but there's still family that lives, and they actually work in the church. They attended Bethel AME in Des Moines, and so I have access for them to be able to pull some of the records there. They got to Des Moines in about 1922. So anything before that would have been in Buxton, and then they did live in Illinois for a short time. Between 1920 to about 1922, they were in Springfield, Illinois.
Okay,
I figured that they might be. I figured that they might be AME because of that John Wesley name. You may want to check the Christian Recorder, which is accessible on Accessible Archives, and then also if you can find it, the Western Christian Recorder was out there during the time period. I haven't been able to find it online anywhere. But if they were an AME family, I definitely recommend the Christian Recorder. Matter of fact, I'm gonna jump on it now and see if I can see anything.
Questions from panelists in the chat room. Angela just asked, where does she live for the remainder of her life, and were there any children born in Iowa? You said she had a slew of kids.
She did. All the children were born between Buxton and Haydock, Iowa, in Enterprise, Iowa. And so there were no children born in Des Moines. They lived in Des Moines for the rest of their life until she passed. So they were in Des Moines for a lot of years.
Okay. And okay, so C. Davis says state mining annual reports are in mining and agriculture, now engineering colleges. Large libraries as well as archives, not just for your state. Detroit has Alabama mining reports. So, just it sounds to me almost like personal papers of former enslaving families and how they may not necessarily be in the same state that the plantation was in or that the family lived in. They may be like up north or they may be somewhere else. Someone asked about an obituary. Do you have an obituary or a funeral program for her?
Yes, I have her obituary. No funeral program. I have her obituary. I have his obituary.
There was nothing in it that she was a relic of.
She was. This was my grandmother's dying wish for me to find who her grandmother was, which is Nellie, because she said they were so talked about anything. They just children were seen and not heard, she always said. So it was just trying to figure out who she was. And
well, I think part of the reason why she was trying to figure it out too is because they were isolated away from family in this environment, right? We actually have an episode later on this year as people of color in isolation. Right? This is the exact scenario. How do you research these people, right? When they have no ties. Maybe cemetery records. Have you looked at the cemetery to see, because sometimes in those large ledgers they may list maiden names, parents' names, locations, who paid for the service, because at that point her husband had passed, right? What is your DNA saying about your ties to Virginia on this side? And do you have any other family members of Mary's, or cousins tested?
Several of my first cousins have tested, second cousins have tested. There's all the descendants of Peter's brothers and sisters, a lot of them have tested. So there's a lot of us that have taken the test, and are kind of pointing to the same family. But the surname that I keep coming up with that we're related to this group called, the surname is Divers, Divers. And I just, my instinct is telling me that Carr is not the right name. And I don't know if this keeps coming up, that there's something is just kind of off there to me.
Yeah, I'm wondering too. See if you can look up those kind of who's who books in Virginia to locate whoever this German doctor is, because remember, people used to pay to to get these really nice profiles written about them in these books. And so you may be able to find, search the census in that area for people with a job title of physician. And see if you can find anyone with a German name, or because at this point, right, this person is an immigrant, right? They probably weren't naturalized, because I think you said she was born in 1880, so this was not a naturalization thing, I don't think. Or there may be naturalization papers. Looking in that particular community, that would be some local level search, for immigration things, right? Just like you would go for deed records and other things. See if you can find historical medical licenses. Look at the newspaper for trying to find patterns, okay, were there a lot of German doctors there, or were there not? Was there only one person? Newspaper ads, they would run newspaper ads for physicians. Limit your search to Lynchburg or wherever she was allegedly born, right? And then the other thing is, once you do get that list of physicians that were in that area, search your DNA matches to see if people pop up with those names, because that also might provide you with some leads.
Any ideas on what other names would be short for the name Nellie? I know Ellen is one, but I've been kind of trying to think maybe it's something in the name that was, maybe it was a different name, and Nellie was short for something else that I'm just not.
Well, Nellie often gets mistranscribed for Nettie.
Nettie, okay.
Nettie. I would do a wildcard search, NE with an asterisk IE, that will pull Nellie, Nettie, right? In the ancestral location with just a first name, right? Because we're pretty sure what her well, we're not really sure what her maiden name is. We're pretty sure what her maiden name is, but we're not really sure what her maiden name is.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, 1900, you're dealing with a 14-year-old,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And you've got Campbell County, so I would, yeah. And then for Nellie, she's gonna be born maybe 1866 or so.
Mhm.
So I would do that. I would do that wild card search to see if you can find Nellie with Nettie, or Nellie with one I, one L or two T's or two L's. Just for, I would start with maybe 1866 as a birth year. Maybe she's 20 when she gives birth to her. And then maybe go plus or minus 5 years. Let's see. Karen Royal is saying that Nellie is sometimes a short for Eleanor. And it could be other names, but I've seen more Nellie and Nettie interchanged, based off of who transcribed the record. Someone else, Angela said Nellie could be short for Helen, Ellen, Petronella, Danielle, Cornelia, Eleanor, Janelle, Chanel, and Noelia. Now, some of those names was
Wow.
not they weren't cracking off back in the 1880s.
Okay.
Cornelia, I think that's a great suggestion
Okay.
that her name could be Cornelia. Everybody's Googling. Let's see. Chris Mother says, what about the surname in the community of her supposed origin? Have you looked in Lynchburg to see if you can find any Goggins or Cars?
Yes, I have. There are some Cars and there are some Goggins. I still can't tell if they're related to that family. So,
Well, local search.
yeah.
Look at deeds, pull up estate inventories, marriage licenses, see if you can find if people were witnesses on people's marriage licenses, right? Of course, for Peter and Mary, it's not going to be that scenario because they were married way in Iowa. But if you look at other cars, just go shoe shopping
Yeah.
in the marriage
Okay.
licenses and see who's affiliated, and see if you can build out a tree for those particular folks. Any other suggestions before we go into current events, you all?
Excuse me. One thing I'm looking at. Did she die in 1916?
No, she died in 1966.
Oh, 66. Okay, never mind. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Oh, I need some mothering with some honey and cough syrup.
Oh my goodness. Well, Shelly is saying Carr is a Virginia surname, so you're not completely far off. Angela says, don't forget just plain Nell as a name. And yeah, I would do a wild card search and hope for the best, searching for Nellies. Because at 14, Mary is living with somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm curious how she got to Virginia in the first place. How did she, get there? And she was so young, coming from Virginia. I'm sure she came with someone.
Someone says, look at Stanton, Halifax County. There are a lot of cars in the 1900s. Yeah, and you might just want to build a car tree, so you can keep everybody straight. And stay tuned to your DNA matches. Really drill down. And here's the thing, you all. Sometimes you got to do the research for the people. They may give you just enough of a clue in order for you to be able to go back and look further. So I would triangulate your matches and to isolate Nellie's branch, or Nellie and Peter, or Mary and Peter. Well, no, yeah, Mary and Peter's branch. More particularly Mary's branch. So then that way you can make down and look at those divers people. Map them out too.
Okay.
To me, I don't know why that's making me feel like that's a sister of somebody, right? Like maybe that's Nellie's sister. She married a divers. Do the same thing. Go through those marriage licenses. Look at the witnesses. Look at who put up the bond, right? Cemeteries, anything you can even establish some amount of like a smoking gun, with those folks. Yep. Someone said Albemarle, huge car family is in Albemarle, Virginia. So, all right. Well, hopefully we gave you enough of Enough work to do for the last 2 weeks.
Yes, thank you so much. You have. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good, and we hope we can encourage everyone else to join us by video, so you don't have to be super intimidated. It makes it so much more of a better experience to participate live. So we just want to thank Denise for joining us 2 weeks in a row. She's definitely one of our best.
Having me. Thank you.
Now we'll be keeping them on our list.
Exactly. We're going to search stuff out. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. We got a few current events to share this evening. Oh boy. Another population of people. This is a documentary about dark-skinned first Swedes. Sparks terror on Twitter. How dare they even suggest that the first people lived in Sweden were black with blue eyes? This has actually happened. People are very upset about this in Sweden. A population of people who had paler skin, a variety of eye and hair colors, arrived around the same time from the east as the people with darker skin and blue eyes. These two peoples are thought to have mixed fairly quickly, and Nordic people eventually came lighter skinned, allowing them to increase their vitamin D production to survive the dark winter. Some Twitter users took the information advertised in the documentary as some sort of conspiracy theory aimed at making people more open to immigration. Lord, today. Quote, indoctrination continues, one said. Oh my gosh. People can't even rely on science because it goes completely against what their thought processes are. Goodness gracious. Shelly says, Denise, check your email. She must have sent you something. So, all right. New DNA technology has led to the arrest on Friday of last week of a South Dakota woman who is being charged with murder for allegedly leaving her newborn child in a ditch 38 years ago. On February 28, 1981, a full-term baby boy was found in a blanket in the cold in Sioux Falls, police said. The baby had been born alive, but died from exposure to the elements, a coroner said, according to Sioux Falls police. No suspects or family members were identified, police said. A cemetery interred the baby and gave him the name of Andrew John Doe, police said. Whoever wrote this, I'm going to pop them for using police said. They can say that another way. The baby's mother, 57-year-old, they didn't read it. They didn't read it out loud, clearly. The baby's mother, 57-year-old Teresa Bentus, was arrested and accused of leaving the baby alive in the ditch, Sioux Falls police said at a news conference. She was charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and first-degree manslaughter. So let's do some math, right? This is 1981. That's 39 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So 38 years ago. And she is currently age 56, which means that she was 17 or 18 years old when this happened. Just want to put that out there. Since April 2018, genetic genealogy has helped identify more than 36 suspects, according to C.C. Moore, chief genetic genealogist for Parabon Nanolabs, which has worked on the majority of the cases, including Andrew John Doe. Parabon helped Sioux Falls investigators build a family tree based on the baby's DNA, and they combed through old birth and marriage announcements to help put the pieces together, Webb said. A possible match was found in February 2019. The suspect, Bentus, still lived in Sioux Falls, and police executed a search warrant to get her DNA, police said. DNA tests then confirmed Bentus was the baby's mother. The baby's father was also still living in Sioux Falls. We did interview them last Wednesday on the anniversary. We believe the baby was put in the ditch on February 27th. It was confirmed that the baby was theirs. But they did not charge the father. They only charged the mother because they said he, quote, didn't know. So I just wanted to make sure that we covered this because this is where we're going genetic genealogy wise. We're digging up abandoned babies of teenage children who clearly were not able to process the fact that they were pregnant, and we're convicting them on murder charges 31 years later. Just want to put that out there in the streets real quick.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Dorothy Bolden adapted the organizing techniques she learned as a civil rights activist to secure protections for domestic workers, a largely unregulated part of the workforce since 1851. Many remarkable Black women and men and women did not receive obituaries in the New York Times this month, with overlooked New York Times is adding their stories to the archives. In 1968, Ms. Bolden helped start the National Domestic Workers Union of America, not a formal union, but an education and advocacy group that she led for nearly 3 decades and that served more than 10,000 members around the country at its height. She even approached her neighbor, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., for his advice on the plight of domestic workers. Quote, I wanted him to help me organize, she said in 1995 in an interview for Georgia State University's Voices of Labor Oral History Project. Quote, the National Domestic Workers Union was the first time there was ever a voice that was powerful in terms of raising standards for the workforce and improving wages, she said. Bolden's group pursued national and local legislation and started job placement and training programs that taught workers how to ask diplomatically for vacation time and higher wages. Quote, you have to teach each maid how to negotiate, Bolden was quoted as saying in House Workers Unite. And this is the most important thing, communication. I would tell them it was up to them to communicate.
Mhm.
Wow. Be sure to check out that obituary. All right. Moving forward, films, books, and ballads tell of the South during the Civil War, but they seem stuck dumb about Black women in the North during those turbulent times. However, the Quaker City has lucked out. Emil Davis's Civil War: The Diaries of a Free Black Woman in Philadelphia, 1863 to 1865, opens a personal window to daily life in the city's vibrant Black community, says Judith Ginsburg, 52, a professor of history at Villanova University, who edited, transcribed, and annotated the diaries. Emily Davis, born 1839 and died 1889, was a lively young woman when the Civil War broke out. She wrote short daily entries in 3 pocket-sized diaries, each no bigger than a cell phone. Geisberg's single-volume edition preserves Emily's spelling and lack of punctuation. Why did they need to say that? They could have just said it preserved her original writing style. Why proceed to degenerate the intelligence of the woman by saying that she had spelling and punctuation issues? But I digress.
Exactly. She was writing.
Reminiscences of my life in camp with the 33rd Colored Troops, late 1st South Carolina Volunteers, makes a good compliment to the diaries. Born into slavery in South Carolina, Taylor became literate because of her enslaved. Okay, I'm not sure where this is going with this part of the story, but feel free to check out the link in the chat to this piece about Civil War era Black women covering their lives in diaries. All right. Have you checked out all the subjects we'll be covering during season 5? Head to whoisnikasmith.com for a downloadable schedule, and don't forget to set your reminders. Tune into the archive of the long-running Research at the National Archives and Beyond, hosted by BlackProGen Live panelist Bernice Bennett. Her next episode is titled Early Federal Census Worksheets with Donna Cox Baker and will air live on Thursday, March 21st, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Early Federal Census Worksheet is a genealogy spreadsheet application for Microsoft Excel that allows the easy capture of the decennial U.S. federal census data from 1790 to 1860, lining up data over time. It creates a visual comparison of the changing composition and geographical locations of families, including white, free, non-white, and enslaved members of any given U.S. household. Also, check out the African Roots podcast, hosted by BlackProGen Live panelist Angela Walton Raji. Visit AfricanRootsPodcast.com for more. Newspapers can be a gold mine for genealogy, especially in the case of records destruction or when all other avenues have failed to yield findings on an ancestor. We talked about them ad nauseum tonight. Episode 81 will discuss all you need to know to get the most out of using periodicals as genealogical resources. Join us on Tuesday, March 26th, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern for extra newspapers for people of color genealogy research. Then the following show after that, many begin their family history journey believing there aren't many records available for African American families or that there is no history to record. We know that is not true at all. In this episode, we'll discuss common myths about African American family history, how to respond to them when they arise in your own family, and ways to share the findings you've made to change the narrative. Join us on Tuesday, April 9th, same time, same bad channel for Use a Lie, busting down myths. I had to say it like that.
You had to.
Join us for Use a Lie, busting down myths about African American history. All right, True, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All righty. Go ahead and handle your business.
All right, hold on. Let me get this back up. Okay. There we go.
All right, Nika, thank you so much for this episode. We really enjoyed celebrating our women and our matriarchs, and we just want to thank Denise for coming out. It's always so enjoyable when you're here. So I hope you come back out again. And if you're out there, hit us up and let us know you want to come on. I think it just makes it so much easier. So
Well,
with that,
thank
we'll
you.
see you soon. And we just want to say thank you. Thanks for everybody out there. Good night.
Hi.
Bye.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
Hello, everybody out there. BlackProGen Live. BlackProGen.
BlackProGen Live.
The unapologetic Black and people of color viewpoint.
The place where evidence tells the stories.